I'm back. I'm sitting outside the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C., about to begin 2 days of filming here on 2 instruments from the fantastic collection kept in the Whittle Pavilion in the Library of Congress, which is behind me. In fact, the Library of Congress is also in front of me because it extends under the road into the Madison building there. In some ways, this building is where my real journey exploring, coming to an understanding of the relationship between instruments and their players and the music written for them, which is one of the things that fascinates me so much. It began here. In 2006, I was invited to give a concert here celebrating, amongst other things, the acquisition of the collection of the great American composer Elliott Schwartz by the library. And as part of that concert, I played the Schubert Fantasy on Fritz Kreisler's violin, and not just his famous Dalgesiu violin, but also with his bow, which in the case, when I opened the case, and this was a big moment for me, I discovered that his 2 Hill fleur-de-lis bows were in the case, probably made by the great British maker William Retford. And the violin was one thing, astonishing violin, but the bows taught me such a lot about Kreisler's playing and how he wanted his instruments to work to reflect who he was. So that began a journey. So I've been back many times, made films for the library and given concerts with a particular focus on things which are very important to the city, the music of the French Revolution and the work of Niccolo Paganini. But this time, we're going to be doing something special, very particular to knowledge exchange violin, which is looking at 2 instruments, the 1700 Ward Stradivari and the 1654 Brookings Amati. These instruments were only made 45 years apart from each other, yet are incredibly different. But also there's another exciting aspect to this. Over the past 2 years, I've been involved in a conversation with the library as they made the decision and then moved forward with a decision to return or to take back the Brookings Amati from its 20th century, 19th century setup and to a Baroque setup with a Baroque neck and a Baroque bridge. All kinds of questions which go with this, to do with the nature of the instrument and the changing nature of how we see sound and timbre. And the last thing I want to do is play compare and contrast with the instruments. But what's fascinating is what's learned with a really great violin like this Amati when you take it back to closer to how it was made. One thing I like to remind myself of is that the Amati family, particularly Niccolo, who made this violin, were extraordinarily long-lived, just as Antonio Stradivari was long-lived. We have instruments carefully labeled by being Niccolo Amati, starting in 1629 all the way up to the year of his death, 1685. And of course we have instruments labeled as being by Antonio Stradivari all the way from 1665 up to 1734. Of course, in both cases, so we have one 58-year long making career and one almost 70-year making career. And the wonderful questions which go with that of what does it mean for a violin maker to make an instrument? But the fundamental thing for me is that one of the reasons for the long primacy of Cremona was the length that these makers lived. And if you stretch that to sort of the next half generation of Guarneris Dalgesiu, then what's amazing is effectively we have really 2.5 generations which find their way all the way from almost the early Baroque right into the Romantic age. So when you look at what happens when you take an instrument back from a 20th century setup to an early 18th century setup, you have to engage with this question of the fact that the makers of these instruments themselves lived across eras. They lived, in Stradivari's case, from almost the age of the late Renaissance into the beginning of the Industrial Age. And this sets up an exciting range of questions which I hope to explore over the next 2 days. One of the people arriving today is my great collaborator Michael Alec Rose, who's just flown in from Nashville, and so we'll be exploring ideas together. But for now, I'm going to sign off and go in, meet my dear friend, the curator Carol Lynn Ward Bamford, with whom I've worked for many years, and we'll begin work.
Thank you.